Welcome to MacroMicroCosm Literary Review. Today we are tackling the political Middle East-based thriller Quill of the Dove by Ian Thomas Shaw, published by Mirrorland Publishers and imprint of Guernica Editions. I received this novel in Halifax this past June. The annual Margaret Lawrence Lecture conducted by the Writers' Trust of Canada hosted Jamaican-Canadian writer Olive Sr. She spoke of ground and the meaning of it in her lecture on the writing life. The cultural identity of societies raised and sustained by fertile ground. She left me echoing her voice in my mind at the reception after the lecture. Ground. I don't think this was a conscious decision. I just think that the time and the moment in which I first picked up Quill of the Dove happened to be one that was reminding me of my own pursuits in the developing world. It was that sense of recalculation, or the lens of seeing life once more in light of my brief and few experiences, that brought Ian Thomas Shaw to our post-lecture group on the roof garden of Halifax's public library. He spoke of Quill of the Dove with a passion I recognized in those I knew, humanitarians and dignitaries whose careers spanned Africa, the Middle East, and the Caribbean. We were familiar enough in mutual experience. I told him I review books, and he unzipped his knapsack. Quill of the Dove rested in my hand, an orange and gray cover with thick cream-colored pages. Mirrorland did an excellent job on layout and design. Quill of the Dove is crisp, eye-catching, and set with sobering but honest blurbs. Like this one by Ursula Flug on the back cover. Quill of the Dove brims with heartache and love for a troubled region. Those words, combined with my own limited experience in humanitarian pursuits, were feeble preparation for the brutal but cathartic construction inside. I feel like apologizing for two heavy reviews back to back, a pattern I remain uncertain of maintaining. I almost stopped and sandwiched a poetry review in the middle, but Quill of the Dove's characters kept niggling at the back of my mind. Hoda and her feminine humanism struggling against the unjust gender dynamic of the Middle East. Mark, a French journalist whose battlefield was decimated under the rapid fire of his camera's shutter. Evan, who was always more and perpetually Australian. Abdullah, whose violent incursions included the complex and heart-shattering development of a true anti-hero. They're as unforgettable as seeing the sunrise on Ghana's Gold Coast, or wading through a hospital where politics speaks no Hippocratic oath. Shaw wrote the characters with an authenticity based around the familiar, and I praise him for that. For the gut-twisting realism of Muslim, Jew, Catholic, atheist smashed together in a finite and unforgettably raw space. Is this the way of literature nowadays? To sober the reader with realism and the plight of those not living in the gilded halls of North American peace? Or am I that kind of reviewer? The one standing on her ottoman, clinging to the previously read paperback in her hands, yelling, "Change me." Maybe it's a symptom of reading Quill of the Dove and Amity back to back. I think I might have to dedicate the next few weeks to science fiction. Set worldwide with a focus on Lebanon in the 1970s and its aftermath in 2007, Quill of the Dove was written by a clever and experienced hand. This novel exudes the confidence of a man who lived Middle Eastern politics in all its infamy and hope and terror. In Ian Thomas Shaw's confidence with his prose is the pulse for all of us without the necessary experience to approach understanding of the conflicts still raging in the Middle East. Until we see them for ourselves, we can but approach the complexities and horrors, the series of martyrs on either side which exist. Quill of the Dove paints all its characters in corners, then sets up landmines of plot as the director yells quiet and set. Dissonant tonalities of religious separations combine with lines on a map and Israeli versus Palestinian versus phalangist versus time. The volatile retelling of the beginnings of the Lebanese Civil War from multiple perspectives, including French journalist Marc Tarragon, cascade around Marie, a journalist from Quebec searching for the past with a photograph in 2007. Quill of the Dove gripped me. It reminded me of the realities of many countries on Earth, and the oddity of them in our comfortable North American perspective. It's A Man's Amity, the novel by Nasreen Pejvak, which tore my heart and pled for the healing for refugees. As a martial artist, I read the action with a breath of freshness. The violence fit, caustic and whole, unglamorous, and as chokingly real as events still lingering around the world. The conundrum of the Middle East is packaged and presented as the tangle it is in Quill of the Dove. Religious, political, and paramilitary groups, villages cut down, the diocesan craters of social demographics smashed in the same tiny space. All struggling with us versus them, all receiving a horrific shake from violent or socially unacceptable acts which demand honorable retribution. When we tangle so many events in such a finite space, the Lebanese civil war becomes a microcosm for the way our world is going. Partisanism slices through our ability to halt the intensity of emotions and see the nebulous other as human beings with their own sets of agitations and fears. If Quill the Dove is anything, it is a volatile lens into catastrophic human nature and the razor-thin hope that if we have more like Mark Tarragon in the world, there may be more than a scraped-knees chance at turning this burning hellbasket around. If I defined Quill of the Dove by standard genre terms, it is a political thriller based in the Middle East. The plot serves with twists and complicated bends with the diligent writing of a career diplomat and novelist in Ian Thomas Shaw. Each chapter sheds layers of paint off the mural of war to reveal the truth beneath whitewashed history lessons and Wikipedia searches of what started it all. It's a book that took some patience to read, not because of any detriment in the prose, but because it was so tense I needed to take breaks from it. I suppose this is the part where I admit to not being a reader of many thrillers. I spend my time in science fiction and in poetry and some form of fantasy that removes a layer from the reality of the prose. But when I read a lasting book, the kind of book that I will remember and look on my shelf and go, "Ugh, do you remember that one?" the characters become fully crafted beings. Friends and villains, people I want to shout at to turn the other way. "No, Mark, don't go into that village." I felt concerned in every page, pessimistically hopeful that at some point those who survived would do so with the form of peace so dauntingly untapped in the Middle East. The intensity of Quill of the Dove unsettled me. I read it in bursts because of its violent virility. After a few chapters, I had to sit it down on my reading table and sit back in my chair, spend time with my spouse and my rescue dogs, which you might be able to hear in the background every once in a while. The rhythm of read, sit down, look elsewhere, read helped maneuver through the tension which undulates in waves of softer moments and time skips that only aided in the novel's progress. Every time I felt like things were getting too intense and I was losing the manuscript, it would switch the timeline and I would be able to settle more into it. This is really cleverly done, and I think the two different time periods actually functioned in mirror with each other very well. It takes true talent and familiarity with the material to present a novel with such grip, and Shaw does so explosively. Quintessentially Canadian in its approach, Quill of the Dove benefits from a lack of rah-rah America I find in many political thrillers. There is no eagle from the Marines there to save the day. There is only the reality of the situation and the fact that on most sides there are enemies everywhere. This is a book of uncomfortable but realistic international appeal. Shaw did not take truth off the top, nor did he cut out those moments which made for a diligent impact to save the reader realism. Although my praise is flagrant through this review, I'll qualify the praise with this. I read to hide from a world I've seen in piecemeal, and Quill of the Dove tears its readers from their seclusion and shuts it into a burning olive oil shop, while a would-be rapist screams and burns and swears inside, while boys young as 12 cling to gap mouths to their rifles, with meat sack holes in their chest from mortar fire. You cannot hide in Quill of the Dove. You can only cling to and experience it, glad that due to its two-timeline structure, you already know at least two of the heroic ones survived. Quill of the Dove shifted how I wish to approach writing. It convicted me for hiding in the realm of the fantastic to avoid such turmoils as real-life war. A quintessential escapist, I love diving into the dramatic as long as the back of my subconscious knows it's not real. Shaw wrote conviction and malice and the unsettling horror of knowing even if the perfect solution to the Middle Eastern crisis was penned by peacemaking fanatics crossing their personal boundaries, the solution would never be implemented. We are simply not that type of race to unclench our raised fists and let go our rage. My thanks to Ian for handing me this novel. If you like Tom Clancy, John le Carré, Robert Harris, and Brad Thor, Quill of the Dove by Ian Thomas Shaw is your new favorite. It was a hard book to grapple with. I understand it seems so simple when you've never been to a place to assume you know why conflicts got started. Ian Thomas Shaw blows that out of the water. I think the biggest part of the novel that I really retained and kept away with was the fact that there were no true villains. There were people on all sides doing horrific things. Bloodshed and horrible, horrible parts of human nature, while people clung to refugee camps and hoped that they got through checkpoints. And we don't know what that's like. We've never experienced that. I think it's so difficult for us to understand why the Middle East is such a complex situation until we read books like this. I think anybody who needs to or wants to get involved should read this book. And I think that a lot of people would be entertained by it. My bias as a slightly more escapist reader is not going to get in the way of reading such well-crafted books like this. It just means I might sandwich it with some lighter scale science fiction. Maybe a poetry book about rainbows and unicorns. Okay, so I haven't read a poetry book about unicorns even. Are those even a thing? Let me know in the comments down below if you know of any poetry collections with unicorns in them. I'll review some. If you wish for fiction that lacks the intensity of the last two reviews, I hope you like the poetry next week. If you have a book you would like to be reviewed, please visit our website. The link is in the description box below. Please follow us on social media at MacroMicroCosm on Twitter and subscribe to our podcast and YouTube channel for weekly reviews. For those of you on our Patreon, thank you so much for subscribing and for providing for us so we can continue doing this. Thank you for your time, and I hope you have a fantastically creative day.